our next speaker is Laura from Ready for Polyamory. So Laura will be doing a reading from her upcoming book, which is titled Monogamy in This Economy. And basically the book is about finances, child rearing, and other practical concerns of polyamory. Really important. We have a lot of kind of polyamory 101 books out there, and I would say that this upcoming book is like a 201 book. And this is also Laura's first ever public reading of this upcoming book, which is very, very exciting. So I'm going to ask Laura to unmute and start the video, and I'm going to spotlight you, and when you're ready.
Great. So, hi guys. Thanks to everyone for showing up. Since someone asked for a book list in the chat, I'm gonna throw the link to my publisher for this upcoming book, which comes out in August, for pre-orders, which includes a 20% off for anyone who gets it through this link. If you'd like to use it, I appreciate it. Pre-orders are great. So I'm going to be reading from the chapter of the book which is titled All About Money. The entire book is not about finances, but because I made a joke about monogamy in this economy, we decided that that was going to be the title. This book is based on a survey I did of folks living in 3 or more adult households, which nearly 500 people participated in. I'm so grateful to all of the folks who conducted the survey and did follow-up interviews with me to allow me to write this book. So I'm going to be reading from this chapter that's about finances, not nearly the whole chapter because we've got about 5 minutes, but I'm going to start now, I guess. So before we engage too deeply with any of the strategies for dividing or combining finances, I want to make a note of how monogamous norms around finances are also shifting in our culture. It used to be that it was an absolute certainty that if you married, you would share a bank account, share credit, and otherwise combine all financial matters. Women couldn't open a bank account or hold credit without their husband as a co-signer in the United States until 1974, so this was not just habit, but a requirement and certainty for many years. While change has been rapid culturally, and both married and unmarried women now have some independent finances, many people still see combining finances as a rite of passage when marrying. The shift in this norm is happening. Fully separate bank accounts are held by 23% of married Americans, and 34% have a mix of joint and separate accounts, with the percentage increasing in younger demographic cohorts. While the studies on this do not consider relationship style as a possible reason for couples wishing to maintain some financial separation, they do consider several pragmatic reasons couples might, including disagreements about how to save or spend, widely differing incomes, being generally low income, 68% of individuals making $50,000 or less a year keep some money in joint accounts, and 83% of those making $100,000 or more do. And those with a mix of account styles generally say that joint expenses should come from joint accounts and individual expenses shouldn't. All of these reasons apply just as much to polyamorous families as to monogamous couples. The math sometimes gets a little more complicated when you have 3, 4, or 5 adults rather than 2, however. So then there's a section heading, some people jointly and some separately. So let's talk about the most common scenario that folks reported in my survey. Some people in the household have fully joint finances and some fully separate. 39.2% of my respondents to the initial survey indicated that this was the case in their household. In follow-up questions, it was virtually always the case that one or more married couples had combined all of their finances and didn't wish to separate these from one another, and an additional partner or an additional married couple did not want to either join them in a further, more joint household account. In some cases, this meant that there were 2 bank accounts being used in the household, one for a couple and one for an individual to cover a household with 3 adults. In some other cases, there were 3 or 4 bank accounts, but at least one of them had 2 adults with fully merged finances using it. These systems tend to have in common that folks talk a lot about money. Keeping some of the finances separate should mean that each person is paying many of their own bills, car payments, gas, insurance, dates with partners outside the house, for example. But it requires a lot of planning for the shared bills. Is there a schedule for who's picking up groceries? If one person's schedule means they do the shopping for the whole family, do they have to ask folks to pay them back in turn? How are people adjusting for income? Is everyone paying each other back for the electric bill? Do you have a spreadsheet? And then it's a breakout box: Dave, Alice, Cynthia, and Mark. I spoke with Dave, a member of a quad from California, who shared the experience his family of 4 adults and 5 children had with financial matters. It was a quad that formed out of 2 married couples, so they entered with 2 sets of joint finances and didn't want to further create additional joint bank accounts to manage the household. One couple was on the mortgage. They assigned many of the bills into the name of the other couple and then did the math about how much the difference was between these expenses before deciding who would pay for groceries, for example, in a given month. This meant that most months, Dave and his wife Alice were paying for the utilities and a greater proportion of groceries, and his partners, Cynthia and Mark, were covering the mortgage and a lesser proportion of the groceries. They all managed kid expenses together as they co-parented and homeschooled their children. Cynthia and Alice had met in a homeschooling mom group, and all moving in together had allowed them to have one more adult go back to work for more hours, as only one parent did fuller time teaching of the elementary-aged children, and the older children went into public schools. The adults managed their car payments and student loans within the couples they were originally in, as well as any pre-existing debt that they'd had. The methods for sending money back and forth between the couples were less of a problem for these folks because they tracked all the bits of expenses that needed to be covered and talked about them as they happened. If something got out of balance or someone was short on cash, they simply sent a bank transfer or a Venmo or grabbed some cash. The key, as Dave expressed to me, was not getting too bent out of shape about individual purchases. If any one person decided alone that something was important and they couldn't afford it, then that's where conflict happens. But if you can say, oh, I've got it covered, there's no argument to be had. Or if it's something we all agree is necessary, like replacing something broken, that's easy. The problems are when someone wants something new or extra and not everyone agrees it's needed and they can't afford it. This theme comes up a lot in the families I spoke to, no matter what the system for sharing expenses was that they used. If something isn't necessarily shared, but you need financial help with it, it becomes a possible source of strife. All of us being used to sharing in a smaller unit and still worrying amongst ourselves about if we're willing to take on the debt or not helped ease some of these worries. So that's the end of that section, and the rest of the chapter goes through different ways of folks splitting their money and different sort of similar stories of different polycules who had divided that way, and then summarizes sort of things that means for folks' finances. But I'm out of time, so I'm not going to be reading it. I'll look at folks' questions in the chat if any of that sort of applies. Thank you so much for having me and for contributing to this cause, Free Palestine. And yes, in the one where everyone contributes differently to joint accounts, we use percentages and things like that is one of the examples. So thanks, folks. Thanks for having me.